All right, welcome back to the studio. Last week we were on the radio show, the Craig Sewing Show, 6 p.m. on 1170 AM KCBQ. Hope you can tune in to the show. We have everything on podcasts on our website. But we had a really interesting conversation. Some of the stuff is making the front page of the paper about vacation rentals, short-term rentals. You're hearing terms like mini dorms. This is really, really interesting stuff because it not only applies to how our real estate market works, real estate values. Maybe you own a property and want to rent something out, or your kids are renting a property out. So this is something that's front and center here in San Diego. And on that radio show with me was Ajay Gupta, our real estate attorney for the program. Ajay, good to have you on the show here today.
Thanks, Craig.
And we also got Mike Jenkins, who's with the Civic Board, or you're on the board of Civic San Diego.
That's right.
Got a mouthful there.
Yeah, I'm not representing them in this discussion.
Okay,
Right.
so help us better understand what's going on. I think this story is relevant to San Diego. We're hearing a lot about it. It's making the front page of the paper. What do we need to know? What do we need to know, Ajay?
So broad strokes, the university setting, this happens across the country. When you have a large university, a lot of the homes in the area get converted to what we call mini dorms, where you might have 10, 15 students living in that particular area. And
I was that student back in the day.
As was I. And so
$200 a month rent is nice.
Yeah.
Times have changed.
Now it's more like, what, $1,000 or $800 a month? And so but the challenge, I think, for the surrounding community is what happens to the nature and the character of that. Is it consistent with the city plan? Is it consistent with what we want to be doing to those neighborhoods? And so I brought Mike. Mike's a longtime friend. I actually used to work for him when he was the director of redevelopment at the San Diego Redevelopment Department. And just a good friend, someone whose opinion and friendship I've come to respect over the years. And he's here to talk to us a little bit about that.
So help us better understand, Mike, if you could.
Well, I guess the big picture is what do we want our community to be?
Right.
And the way that we usually express that is that we adopt community plans. And you mentioned that I'm on the board of Civic San Diego. Downtown has a very specific plan. It has a master environmental impact report. And that has made development really pop in downtown. And that's been the approach that we've done since the 1980s. And it's an effective approach. The problem that we have in the college area is that we have an adopted community plan that basically designates much of the area around San Diego State University as being single-family residential. Mm-hmm. But we have this strong economic pressure to house a bunch of new students because SDSU is growing, they've increased the enrollment and so forth, and so that's putting some pressures on that community plan.
Which is a good thing, right? We want the school to grow. I'm sure that's good for the community, but you're saying that there is a unintended consequence that relates to housing.
Right.
All right?
Now we know around the country that many universities have addressed this issue, many of them quite successfully, so that the community becomes an amenity for the university and the university is an amenity for the neighborhoods. People like living in those kinds of communities.
Yep. Places
like the University of Wisconsin in Madison is a really good example of how that was handled. Harvard did it in a different way. Very nice communities. Other universities have not managed it so well. And so what has happened is that they've seen a pattern of blight that develops. Property owners, investors come in and develop the properties or subdivide them up to accommodate large numbers of students, and that creates stresses in the neighborhoods. And if it's not properly managed, then those stresses can short-term increase in property values, but long-term blight that results from that. And that is much harder to fix once it becomes blight than it is to manage
Explain
the
what you mean by blight.
Well, that means that the property values have declined so much that the maintenance of the properties declines, and people are no longer interested in living in those properties.
So Mike, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about some of the specific challenges that you see happening with SDSU, because you and I, again, have discussed this, the parking situation, the noise, some of the way
Parking's a nightmare.
Right.
Right.
So, and how to kind of describe some of those things that lead to the blight that you're talking about.
Well, this is not a new issue with San Diego State. This has been going on for decades. And to a large degree, the city has managed it. We have administrative programs to make sure that the parking doesn't go crazy, and the SDSU has a good neighbor program and so forth. So things have been pretty much managed, but very recently, with the large pressure because of the new students, many investors are coming in, they're buying up a house, and then they are obtaining permits to greatly expand the size of the house and to pave over the front yard, the side yard, the backyards. That doesn't make for a real attractive neighborhood. And so the question is, what is our plan? What is our community plan? What does that mean? And is there a way in which we can accommodate the growth in the students and house the students in a way that's effective for the university without destroying the neighborhood?
So as an example, maybe somebody comes, they find maybe a fixer, I'm hoping get permits, you never know, and they build onto this property, they add a unit or they add a bedroom to it, and then their goal is to clean it up and make it a rentable property. I mean, some of these things these guys can do on real estate now, I mean, they could turn a single family home into a multi-unit property just by building it out, and then you run into permit issues. Now, I don't know if they're following that code or not, but that creates part of the problem.
Well, that's part of the
I mean,
problem.
we're seeing this in neighborhoods as well, not even just the campuses.
That's right. This is a citywide issue, but it's certainly concentrated at San Diego State University. So the issue is we have the area zoned for single-family residential use, but what does that mean? What are the tools that the city has for determining what's a single-family residential use? And it turns out that we don't really have real restrictions on what that growth is. So somebody can come in and get a permit so that a house that was designed to accommodate a family of 4 that has 3 bedrooms now all of a sudden is maybe accommodating 12 to 15, maybe 20 students.
So
it's like a little mini frat house. You call it mini dorm. I mean, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, if I was still 19 years old, sounds awesome.
Right.
But we're talking about the city of San Diego.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't have that kind of a life experience. I mean, that's the time that you do it is in college. But let's figure out what our neighborhood rights are, what the zoning is.
Of course, yeah. The 19-year-old should not be the tail wagging the dog here on this issue. I certainly wouldn't have looked to me at 19. But, and I think it's so interesting because a lot of the money that's moved into San Diego can identify these properties. They can do a magnificent job of fixing these things up, but all of a sudden you're creating potential housing issues. AJ, I think it's just really interesting, right? I mean, you have, let's speak to the people that are tuning in this show right now. I mean, they might be seeing this happening in their neighborhood. And, I know that you're dealing with cases all across San Diego, but it's just been fascinating. You've come on the radio show. We've talked about vacation rentals recently. Now this issue. Are you seeing that more people are reaching out to you? Is there a way that we could advise anyone if there's something they're experiencing in their neighborhood? Is there any kind of takeaway here today?
I hate to say no because this is, but this is such a broad public policy issue, and Mike's really alluded to this, and that is, as an individual, if your neighbor happens to build a frat house, you may not have a tremendous amount of rights as long as they're within the zoning requirements and they're properly permitted, and so that's, I think, part of the challenge is from an individual perspective, it's very difficult to say, hey, these guys can't do what they're doing because they're within the bounds of the law. And so it really does state to, I guess, again, what Mike was alluding to is what types of communities do we want to have and where do we want to have them? I think the more interesting question might be, and I know we're kind of coming up on time here, but the more interesting question might be, who cares? Like, why not turn these all into free
market?
Free market. Yeah. What is it? Is it the city's job to come in and regulate these types of situations to create the dynamic that they want? And I probably have the wrong guy in the chair because with Mike's background, he can probably speak to that really directly and talk about the advantages to planning and things like that.
Well, I think the fundamental approach is that property rights are not absolute. It's always a balancing act. What are my rights versus your rights? If my rights, impose burdens on your rights, then how do we balance those out? And the way that we normally handle it in this country is through zoning. And we've had zoning as an approach going back to the early part of the 1900s, and approved, authorized by the Supreme Court as a valid approach to maintaining property values. The whole, we know from years of experience that if there is zoning in place, it may inflict some damage to the property values of a few users by limiting what they can do, but by and large it creates the wealth opportunities for everybody that is mined.
It's an interesting topic, and it's exactly why we have you here today, and it's exactly why people are hearing about it in the news now. Right. They're seeing it in the paper. It's becoming a little bit of an issue. I think you're right. There's two sides of this thing here. You don't want the government overreaching, but you got to have some sort of regulation on it. I'm kind of a free market guy, but it depends. It depends what those consequences are. But
so, Mike, do you know if you are in that situation, you want to advocate strongly for one side or the other? I mean, who do people reach out to?
Well, ultimately, this is a decision that's going to be made by the city council, because what it really comes down to is what's the zoning and what are the regulations in place to implement that zoning.
So let me pause you there. So reach out. We're running out of time here. Hard break. But so reach out to your city council, have an opinion, go online.
Member, right. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure we can direct you at least to our website. If you want to reach out to us, we can connect you with AJ or Mike and certainly give you instructions there. But interesting stuff. This show, we integrate a lot of real estate. There's a lot of laws that come in this space as well, and we want to make sure that we educate the public the right way and give you the information you need. So appreciate you guys coming in here and helping us understand all the stuff we're seeing out there and making some sense of it. All right, coming up next, we went out to East County to meet with the top realtor per the Wall Street Journal, Kyle Whistle, who discussed some of the things happening in that marketplace. We also are going to be diving into what's happening with interest rates, opportunities there, and we're bringing in Glenn Henderson and Shannon Keatley, real estate elite that are just dominating the marketplace, help us understand some of the things happening with our suburbs here in San Diego. So coming up here on The American Dream, stick around, back here in just a moment.